The first passage is from the introduction of another book by Brian Swim called The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos. And this is, the first reading is just from the, which is going to summarize some of what we've just been talking about. And the introduction is called The Way of Cosmology. The really surprising thing is that the news of the birthplace of the universe was always here. I mean that for as long as there have been humans on Earth, there has always been this news of the universe's birthplace showering us day and night. This must be a central facet of human existence, to have the truth right in front of us and yet be unable to see it or recognize it. In the case of the origin of the cosmos, the news is carried by particles of light, photons. And these particles have been here since the beginning. The problem is that the photons are too dim to be seen by the unassisted human eye. Just think of how many humans since the beginning of history wandered around bathed in the news of the origin of the universe, all of them simply unable to respond to what was quite literally right there before them. The entire scientific enterprise can be characterized as the development of sensitivities and ideas necessary to become more fully aware of what is happening all around us. Seen in this perspective, the discovery of the birthplace of the universe is a 4 million year learning event. I say 4 million years because though it's difficult to identify where we should mark the beginning of humanity, one way to proceed is to take the origin as the moment when our ancestors first began walking on two legs. Some anthropologists prefer the moment when our ancestors first began using tools in a systematic way around 2.5 million years ago. In any event, one has to stop and wonder over this drama where humans are wandering about, thinking, working, mating, suffering, even for millions of years. And throughout every moment of that long journey, we have been suffused with the light from the beginning of time. The gift of the scientific venture is the capacity to see what was here all along. And the summary understanding achieved by this long process of inquiry can be stated so simply. The birthplace of the universe, where existence first sprang forth, is 15 billion light years from the Earth. Most physicists regard this discovery of the birthplace of the universe as the most significant of the 20th century. It was an enormously complex task involving thousands and ultimately millions of scientists. It was only by their careful and painstaking investigation of the universe, collecting data, developing new mathematical languages, debating the many interpretations, that the knowledge of the birthplace was finally secured. In this exploration of the cosmic center, transmission of information concerning the discoveries of modern science is, of course, a basic aim. But the greater challenge is to identify the meanings such discoveries have for human existence. These notes, meaning this book, are rooted in a single central conviction concerning our discovery of the birthplace of the universe, a conviction I will state baldly here and will return to throughout. 400 years of modern science now reach a culminating moment with the discovery of the universe's birthplace. Certainly science's irruption in the 16th century was destructive not only of the European worldview, but of every traditional worldview with which science has had contact. But that destructive phase is now ending, and an integrative period begins. Even though science's violent rejection of every cultural and tribal tradition has been deleterious in the extreme, and even though one can appreciate the vehemence with which fundamentalist religions around the planet reject any compromise with modern scientific secular culture, the opportunity of our time is to integrate science's understanding of the universe with more ancient intuitions concerning the meaning and destiny of the human. The promise of this work is that through such an enterprise, the human species as a whole will begin to embrace a common meaning and a coherent program of action. One way to identify the significance of what is taking place is to say that science now enters its wisdom phase. This presentation on the new cosmology is part of our contemporary exploration of the wisdom within the great discoveries of the scientific enterprise as a whole. We are challenged here with understanding the significance of the human enterprise within an evolving universe. Upon our success in meeting this challenge rests the vitality of so much of the Earth community, including the quality of life all future children will enjoy. That was Brian Swim. Passionate guy. Tried to read it passionately. This is another reading that talks about consumerism. and I want to juxtapose this reading with what you just heard, this evolving universe and the sacred quality of the universe, and how we're an integral part of that, as reflected in the previous readings. The fact that consumerism has become the dominant world faith is largely invisible to us. So it is helpful to understand clearly that to hand our children over to the consumer culture is to place them in the care of the planet's most sophisticated religious preachers. If those bizarre cults we read about in the papers use even 1/10 of 1% of the dazzling deceit of our advertisers, they would be hounded by the Federal Justice Department and thrown into jail straight away. But in American and European and Japanese society, and increasingly everywhere else, we are so blinded by the all-encompassing propaganda, we never think to confront the advertisers and demand they cease. On the contrary, as if cult members ourselves, we pay them lucrative salaries and hand over our children in the bargain. The second reason for bringing up the advertisement's hold on us has to do with my fundamental aim in presenting the new cosmology. If we come to an awareness of the way in which the materialism of the advertisement is our culture's primary way for shaping our children, and if we find this unacceptable, we are left with the task of inventing new ways of introducing our children and our teenagers and our young adults and our middle-aged adults and our older adults to the universe. These notes on the new cosmology are grounded in our contemporary understanding of the universe and nourished by our most ancient spiritual convictions concerning its meaning. These notes are a first step out of the religion of consumerism and into a way of life based upon the conviction that we live within a sacred universe. You don't have to clap for Brian, but he's really good. Okay. Here's another visual prop. My deceased wife had left that in there. It was nice to have a kid or things like that. This is from the book called The Great Work, Our Way into the Future. Highly recommended. This is a classic book by a guy whose vision is so encompassing that you can't read this book without coming away feeling like, whoa, I better get involved in the great work and do my part. And the great work being the transition from what Thomas Berry calls the transition from what we're evolving into a Technozoic era. You know, we're living in this end of the Cenozoic era from the geological perspective, the evolution of the planet, Earth. He'd like for us to move into an Ecozoic era, where ecology is the metaphor that integrates all forms of life into a presence. Another thing he often says is the universe is not a collection of objects. It's a communion of subjects. Okay, this is just from the introduction. Human presence on the planet Earth in the opening years of the 21st century is the subject of this book. We need to understand where we are and how we got here. Once we are clear on these issues, we can move forward with our historical destiny to create a mutually enhancing mode of human dwelling on the planet Earth. Just now, we seem to be expecting some wonder world to be attained through an ever greater dedication to our sciences, technologies, and commercial projects. In the process, however, we are causing immense ruin in the world around us. We might begin to think about our present life situation by reflecting for a moment on the wonder of Earth, how it came to be the garden planet of the universe, and what might be our human role in this context. To appreciate our immediate situation, we might also develop a new intimacy with the North American continent, for we need the guidance and support of this continent as we find our way into the future. The most basic and most disturbing commitment of the original European settlers was to conquer this continent and reduce it to human use. Because the exaltation of the human and the subjugation of the natural have been so excessive, we need to understand how the human community and the living forms of Earth might now become a life-giving presence to each other. We have already shaped the critical understanding and the appropriate technologies that can assist in establishing a beneficial human presence with the other components of this continent and also with the one great Earth community. We need only see that our human technologies are coherent with the ever-renewing technologies of the planet itself. Indigenous resource in fulfillment of this task is the guidance of the indigenous peoples of this continent, for they have understood, better than we have understood, the integral relation of humans with this continent and with the entire natural world. In an earlier period, we have been profoundly concerned with divine-human relations. In more recent centuries, we've been concerned with interhuman relations. Our future destiny rests even more decisively on our capacity for intimacy and our human-earth relationships. Of the institutions that should be guiding us into a viable future, the university, including Ohio State, has a special place because it teaches all those professions that control the human endeavor. In recent centuries, the universities have supported an exploitation of the earth by their teaching in the various professions, in the sciences, in engineering, law, education, my area, and economics. Only in literature, poetry, music, art, and occasionally in religion and the biological sciences has the natural world received the care that it deserves. Our educational institutions need to see their purpose not as training personnel for exploiting the earth, but as guiding students toward an intimate relationship with the earth. For it is the planet itself that brings us into being, sustains us in life, and delights us with its wonders. In this context, we might consider the intellectual, political, and economic orientations that will enable us to fulfill the historical assignment before us, to establish a more viable way into the future. As in creating some significant work, the artist first experiences something akin to dream awareness that becomes clarified in the creative process itself. So we must first have a vision of the future sufficiently entrancing that it will sustain us in the transformation of the human project that is now in process. Such an entrancing vision we propose here as the Ecozoic era, the period when humans would become a mutually beneficial presence on the earth. That future can exist only when we understand the universe as composed of subjects to be communed with, not as objects to be exploited. Use, as our primary relationship with the planet, must be abandoned. While there are critical issues providing food, shelter, and livelihood to vast numbers of peoples, these issues themselves ultimately depend on our capacity to sustain the natural world so that the natural world can sustain us. All our sciences and technologies and all our social institutions become dysfunctional if the natural life system seeks to function. Intimacy with the planet and its wonder and beauty and the full depth of its meaning is what enables an integral human relationship with the planet to function. It is the only possibility for humans to attain their true flourishing while honoring the other modes of earthly being. The fulfillment of the earth community is to be caught up in the grandeur of existence itself and in admiration of those mysterious powers whence all this has emerged. Nourishment of both the outer body and the inner spirit will be achieved in intimate association with each other or not at all. That we can now understand and work toward this fulfillment is the challenging future that opens up before us in these early years of the 21st century. That's just a little prelude. How much time do I have? Over 10, okay. I'm going to do a quick reading from Thomas Berry. The Fourfold Wisdom. He has chapters that deal with reinventing the human. He has wonderful text here regarding all aspects of what I was just in the very beginning, in the preface, introductory kind of comments. This is from chapter 16, and just the first couple of paragraphs of the Fourfold Wisdom. And how are we going to get there? He's got many answers, but in these opening years of the 21st century, as the human community experiences a rather difficult situation in its relation with the natural world, we might reflect that a fourfold wisdom is available to guide us into the future. The wisdom of indigenous peoples, the wisdom of women, the wisdom of the classical traditions, and the wisdom of science. We need to consider these wisdom traditions in terms of their distinctive functioning, in the historical periods of their florescence, nice word, and in their common support for the emerging age when humans will be a mutually enhancing presence on the earth. indigenous wisdom, which extends far back into the Paleolithic period, survives even into the present among the 200 million indigenous peoples. The wisdom of women, which flourished throughout the Neolithic period, is now experiencing a reassertion of itself in a new form. The wisdom of the urban classical literate traditions had its beginning some 5,000 years ago and was the most powerful force in human cultural formation until it was challenged by the scientific tradition of more recent times. Science as a wisdom tradition is only in its beginning phase, even though scientific knowledge has advanced with amazing success ever since the 16th century. He goes on to elaborate on each of those. And since I've